Hi friends, my name is Adri and this is my YouTube channel Perpetual Pages, and today I'm so honored and excited to welcome debut author Gabriela Martins to my channel to talk about her debut book Like a Love Song, which just came out on August 3rd from Underline Press and is available to read now as you're watching this. So thank you so much, Gabriela, for making the time to be here today and also for allowing me to read an early copy of your book. It was really wonderful to read. It's so fun and heartfelt and thoughtful, and I'm really excited to get more into it with you in this discussion. So I'm going to start by actually giving you a chance to introduce yourself in your own words and tell everybody what Like a Love Song is all about.
Thank you so much for having me on your channel. I'm a big fan. I'm Gabriela Martins, and this is my debut, Like a Love Song. And it's a story about how this girl, who is an international pop star with 2 world tours on her back, super famous, she has a less than ideal moment when her boyfriend dumps her. It's broadcast to the whole world to see, and she becomes a meme. She goes viral in the worst possible way, and her PR team comes up with a solution of hiring this guy here, who is an indie actor, to play her boyfriend.
To start off with probably the question you're going to hear most as you make your virtual rounds, where did the inspiration for Like a Love Song come from? Or where did the idea start?
It's funny because I do get this question a lot, and I always answer it a little bit differently, because the truth is it came from a lot of places. From having grown up with the media constantly criticizing Taylor Swift for having had boyfriends. And I always like to preface this by saying that there is a lot of valid criticism to be done to all celebrities, including Taylor Swift, but dating is not one of them. That is something we should all feel free to do if we are interested in that. It weirds me out how the media thinks that they have ownership. Well, how we all think we have ownership over the private lives of celebrities, because they are artists, right? They are creating content, they're creating artistic content. But unlike us, they don't get to have a private life. Their private life is sold along with those album copies and so forth. And over time, that continued to be something I wanted to explore in some way. I also often think about how much more difficult my life would have been if I was a teenager nowadays because of the internet. So, we had our flip phones. We had our brick big Nokia phones that had no access to the internet. If you were very rich, you had like a BlackBerry. So this was also something that I wanted to think about when I was writing that book. Things have changed at such a fast pace, and it's just so difficult to deal with all of this sometimes. For celebrities, especially when they are teenagers, people really like to talk about them as if they were adults, and they just consider that because they have over a certain number of followers on Twitter, they are not off limits, that they can be criticized as if they were fictional characters. There is one part in my book where Nachi is looking over the comments that people make about her, and she realizes that a lot of the criticism, a lot of the harsher criticism, the mockery, comes from people a lot older than her. I hope that this is something that my book can make people think about a bit, before you go and criticize a young girl for just doing her art and often just existing and having human emotions.
I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I think about that a lot, especially what you were speaking to about how people online feel some sort of ownership over people that they follow on the internet, whether it's a celebrity or a public figure or even authors, or sometimes they feel like if they're mutuals with someone online that they have some kind of friendship that would translate offline, which is not necessarily true. So I think you made some really good points about that. And yes, I agree that like this evolution of technology, we're kind of in a place where we don't really know what to do with it, because there's people like you and I who, like you were just saying, when we were younger, there was no like readily made internet access, and the things that we didn't make it online and weren't permanently online the way that things are now. We're kind of navigating this space where it's like we have this access to each other now. How do we act with it? What do we do with it? And how do we continue to see people like people? To jump off your point of inspiration, I'm also curious to know how you decided that this story was going to be a Hollywood romance, or in other words, a romance that has two famous people. What about that dynamic really interested you?
I am someone who could never be famous. I would absolutely hate the spotlight in that sense. I want to be appreciated and recognized, but not famous, Again, it goes back to how I wanted to kind of talk a bit about how they are artists. They shouldn't have to give up their personal lives just because they love craft. We don't have to do this to the same extent as authors, but we also have to share maybe a little bit more than what we're comfortable. I'm very lucky because I'm an extrovert. So for me, doing interviews is fun. I enjoy this. But I know so many people who hate it. It should be okay. Our job should be just here. If you like to write, that should be, your job, writing a good book. If you like to act, your job should be to act well, not necessarily selling who you're dating, your family scandals and all of that. That's very strange to me. So I wanted to come at it from these two perspectives of someone who enjoys being famous and someone who absolutely loathes it from the beginning and is not willing to let the public eye into some parts of his life.
So you kind of touched on it a little bit, but as we've kind of talked about, I assume you don't have any personal experience being an international pop star. I'm curious to know if you were intimidated at all to take on that perspective and what kind of research you did to really put yourself in that kind of space.
Writing any type of book can be intimidating when you think about it because we very rarely are writing from our exact perspectives. As someone who followed celebrity culture to some extent for a very long time, and I had access to amazing biographies, amazing memoirs that really helped, I wanted to kind of give space, so touch a little bit on fan culture as well as celebrity culture, because yes, there's the bad side of all the overwhelming, smothering pressure that it comes from so many strangers talking about your life all the time, but also it can save so many people to have you as their role model. The parasocial relationship of identifying with this person who doesn't know who you are and who probably never will, and taking their songs into the context of your life, feeling like they were made just for you.
I really like what you said there about taking what someone else has created and putting it into the context of your own life. I think that's really important, and that's something that happens a lot, actually. And I definitely agree. I used to work in a high school myself, so I know how impressionable young people are when it comes to the people they look up to. And, sometimes the people they look up to are celebrities or public figures or things like that. There is something to be said about the importance of how public figures sometimes act as role models inadvertently to younger people. So there's definitely a lot of influence there as well. If you saw us change platforms right now, no, you didn't. You kind of touched on this a little bit as well, but I also really enjoyed how realistically you explored Natalia's online interactions with her fans. She sees the fan accounts, the Twitter memes, the TikTok sounds. She gets tagged and stuff all the time. It feels very real, very relevant, very now. How did you tap into those elements of fandom, and what do you think the story is saying about those online dynamics between public figures or celebrities and their fans?
So I think it goes back to what we were talking about before of humanizing people. Even with authors, I feel like past a certain number of followers, you stop being a real person to people. I have barely launched my debut and I've been tagged in so many rude things already. It's okay if you hated my book and you want to talk about it. I am absolutely not against that. But why do you need me to see it? One thing that was very recurrent in all the memoirs and articles that I read by celebrities was that they saw what people said about them when they thought nobody was watching, when they thought nobody would see it. And it's cruel. If you wouldn't say these things to someone's face, you shouldn't say it online.
I totally agree, and I really appreciate you bringing that in as well, because there is sort of a power imbalance when it comes to being online. People feel emboldened, I guess you could say. I think that's an interesting perspective, and you definitely get that in her storyline as well, with the way her fans are reaching out to her. Sometimes it's positive and sometimes it's negative, and that's just kind of what comes with her territory as an international superstar. I'm also curious to know if there are any real-life movie stars or pop stars that inspired your depictions of Natalia and William, or did you just sort of decide to write them from a more personal place?
There was these two people online. We don't know what their relationship is, but people were speculating that they were a couple and getting really excited about these two people together. Now, as someone who follows the work of one of them but not the other, I was just so unimpressed. I was like, why are you all losing your minds over this? Like, if it's real, if it's not PR, because I think it's PR, why do you think he's hot? He looks like a child, low key. Then I already knew I wanted to write a story like this. And I was like, okay, what if this was for PR, but she also ended up developing feelings for him and vice versa? So it wasn't really the characters that were inspired by them, but the dynamic, I guess, of how unimpressive I thought this guy was. So yeah, I wanted to kind of explore this narrative of having a soft boy, by her side. I know that now people appreciate the idea of soft boy love interest. That's not what I grew up with. I grew up with the very overly masculine and oftentimes with tons of toxic masculinity. That was seen as like the ideal when I was a teenager.
I think you bring up a really good point that William's positioning as a soft boy, as you sort of called him, a soft boy love interest, is really interesting because it also inadvertently comments on male beauty standards, I guess, in Hollywood, especially in America, where, like you said, there is this sort of unspoken norm that like you have to be shaped a certain way, you have to have a certain amount of muscles, you have to weigh so much, and we often think about that in terms of how it pressures women or femme presenting or feminine people, but we don't often talk about how that reflects back on men or mask presenting people as well. In the beginning, when Natalia's like, is this the guy I'm really going to be dating? Like, he's not hot, like in the traditional sense of being hot or attractive, but then obviously she learns to peel back the layers and gets to know him a little bit more. So there is kind of a commentary on that, I would say. To kind of switch gears a little bit, something that really stood out to me with this fake dating scenario is that there's an actual legal and monetary agreement that is set up between both parties, which is much higher stakes than you would usually see in most fake dating romances. How did that contract affect the way that you navigated the relationship between these two characters? And how did you try to balance that dynamic?
I have a friend actually who works in PR. She doesn't have any clients who are international pop stars, but she does work for a PR agency. And she actually showed me an NDA. I really wanted to know, is this really legal? And yeah, it's legal. It's totally legal, even encouraged. And there's been some stories where it's gone absolutely wrong. So I thought it was very interesting to explore this and how, if you're going to go off track for just a bit, you need like written consent of the other party. I think it's kind of fascinating because it's a world where, like you said, no, I do not have an experience being a pop star. It's a world that's completely foreign to me.
That's also a good way to frame it, I guess, is that it seems intense because there's all this legal jargon involved, but in some ways it's kind of protecting both of them as well, which is important because, like you said, they're teenagers, they're minors. So I think that's an interesting way to think about it as well. I also want to say that Natalia, to me, feels like a very real person, even though she is an internationally famous pop star. And one of the most real things about her storyline is that she's having to confront and name racism that is ingrained within the music industry specifically, especially in the United States. Why was that an important discussion for you to address, and how do you see that as being connected to the fake dating scenario?
Adri, can I tell you a story about the first time I went to the United States? So the first time I went, I was Natch's age. I was 17. I had never before, being 17 years old, I had never before thought of myself as Latina. I had never been out of Brazil before. I had never consciously thought about myself as a Latina or even as a Brazilian. I had never thought about what could be people's conceptions of me based on my nationality alone, or my pronunciation and all of that. I had never thought about that. Never. Not saying that my English is perfect now, but it was not as good as it is now. Back then, it was enough to communicate, but certainly I sounded a little different. The first thing that really stood out to me was that this was a reason for laughing. I went to school for linguistics. This is the basis of linguistics. If you understand what I mean, grammar is irrelevant. If you get your message across, you can't speak that language. So I was very confused. I did not understand why people were laughing at my English. Then my cousin, who was a little bit older than me, he decided to take me to a party. He had just started college, and it was a very stereotypical American college party with, the red cups and everything. That was a moment where a lot of things that were actually mentioned in the book happened. And one boy told me immediately after I said I was Brazilian, which, by the way, they didn't just guess I was Brazilian. They saw me talking and were like, "You're Mexican, right?" No. Nice try, though. Nice try. Not even in the same hemisphere, but nice try. So I said, "No, I'm Brazilian." And then when I said I was Brazilian, one of the guys looked at me and he said, "My dad's just come back from Buenos Aires." And I'm like, "Dude, that's in Argentina." And he's like, "Yeah, and Argentina is in Brazil, right?" But the best thing, well, the weirdest, I guess, thing that happened that night was this guy who looked at me and asked, "Can you make chimichangas?" At that point, I had no idea what chimichangas were. I had never heard of that before. This is not from my country. We don't even speak the same language. We were not even colonized by the same people. So, that experience was the first time I thought of myself as a Latina. And I went back to Brazil with all of those confused feelings. And that was a moment of kind of shock to me because, as a white Latina, I had never experienced not having privilege. I don't want to equate the uncomfortable comments I had with what Afro-Latinx go through or darker skinned Latinx. So yeah, it's absolutely worse for them. This is something that always follows me. The expectations, the imaginary monolith of the Latinx people. Adri, I cannot tell you how many times people have randomly started speaking to me in Spanish after hearing my name is Gabriela. And Brazil is a very big country. My culture as a South Brazilian is very different than the culture of an indigenous Brazilian from the North or, from the people of the Northeast that live among deserts. It's a very plural, very rich country with many, many different types of landscapes and stuff.
Yeah, I think you brought up a really good point, especially with ethnocentrism or American centrism that is so prevalent here in the US. There's so much privilege and so much power that we hold as Americans in the United States that sometimes people feel like they don't have to learn about other countries. They don't have to learn about geography. If it doesn't exist in the US, then it doesn't exist, period, which obviously is a very harmful mindset to have. Natalia as a character is sort of coming up against that because people expect her to be certain things and she's not really allowed to express her own culture when she's expected to meet a very American standard, which we're going to talk more about in a second. As we were saying, I also really appreciate how the story comments on how our definitions of popular or desirable or marketable even are all too often about achieving proximity to whiteness, or more specifically to American culture. And Natalia is realizing that the ways she's been forced to assimilate in the industry are toxic and that she's sort of internalized these respectability politics, and that's how she carries herself. So how do you see the story challenging those ideologies, and what do you hope it conveys to young readers about authenticity?
Throughout the story, I hope to highlight Nachi's journey to unlearning what she thought were milestones for her success as a pop star. And yes, they were to approximate to, American centrism and all of that, even though she is marketing herself for the whole world. And I think it's important to note that there's not one point at the book where, for example, her manager comes to her and tells her that she needs to straighten her hair, that she needs to wax her legs. They don't have to tell her that. TV tells her that. Other artists tell her that. The media tells her that. It's bigger than just one person saying, "Hey, how about you do this to sell more?" This is something that is ingrained with how we are raised constantly. The American colonialism and imperialism still reflects on us heavily. One thing that I mentioned in the book, for example, is the relationship that people have with their hair. Latinx folks in general, but yes, especially Brazilians, we have a ton of hair. We have a lot of body hair. And that's because we are more closely related to our indigenous ancestors, because we needed hair because of the type of environment where we lived. Hair is healthy. Hair protects us from toxins. There's a reason we have hair. For me, that was the most difficult relationship that I had as a teenager and as a young adult. My relationship with my hair, also straightening hair. My hair looks a bit straighter than it is because I had to blow dry it, but my hair is wavy. And when I was Nachi's age, I chemically straightened it constantly. We had that influence that is entirely American of how beautiful hair should look like. And again, I recognize my privilege in being a white Latina. It's much worse for Black Latinos, but it's a problem that I believe affects all colonized countries. The United States still has a very strong imperial hold, even in the countries where they are not actively colonizing, which are a lot.
Yeah, that's completely true. And I really appreciate you bringing up the points you did about hair as well. It kind of reminded me of, there's a great poetry collection, I don't know if you read it, called Peluda by Melissa Lozada Oliva, which is an incredible sort of treatise on body hair and body positivity and like learning to reclaim what is natural to your body as part of yourself, even though it's been colonized and it's been recast and reframed as being connected to cleanliness or worthiness or desirability and all that kind of stuff. So that's really interesting. I definitely recommend that to anyone who wants to learn more about that. And I definitely relate as well. When I was a teenager, I did go through like a straightening phase. When I had longer hair, I went through a straightening phase as well, which was so damaging for my hair. And it was just so not what my hair wanted to do. So it never looked the way that I wanted it to look. Like you said, there is a prevalence of that sort of beauty standard, especially in America, and that gets filtered out to other places in the world. Absolutely. I also like what you said about how nobody in Natalia's life has to like come in and explicitly tell her, you have to look like this, you have to do these things. It's something that she's imposing on herself because of what has been reinforced in her own life and what she's been taught. And I think that's a very real experience. Speaking of microaggressions and casual racism, another problem that Natalia often runs into is that people have a very monolithic understanding of what it means to be Latinx, which we sort of discussed earlier, and assuming that every Latinx person comes from the same place, speaks the same language, has the same culture, which is obviously not true. How are you hoping to spotlight and celebrate Brazilian culture specifically in the story?
So one thing I wanted to make sure people understood is that while Nachi is trying to get better at her own language, which is Portuguese, not Spanish, she absolutely does not speak Spanish. I wanted to make it very clear that she did not speak Spanish. There were no fair expectations that she would speak Spanish. She is trying to get better at Portuguese, but that's a completely different language and it's a completely different culture. So I do bring up at some point some Brazilian snacks that I love. And I also wanted to highlight her relationship with novelas. Throughout Latin America, we are all attached culturally to soap operas. Typically, Hispanics call them telenovelas. The soap operas that I've talked about in the book, they are actually real soap operas that I grew up watching, or, that I've watched recently and really liked. And I wanted to, have a little bit of that as well, because it's something very strong for us. The way the United States commits to making a gazillion TV shows, we commit to making novelas that are like each 150 episodes long. They air for a few months every single night, and we watch them, we discuss them with family, with friends. It's a big cultural thing. So I wanted to include that to some extent.
I love that you brought that up, because I think novelas, we do have a very specific culture with that, and we have a very specific appreciation for that. They are hundreds of episodes long, and they air daily, like nightly, and that's not something that you often see in American culture, especially now, even with streaming, which has once again changed how we consume media. Every single day you're going to see these characters, you're going to be with these characters, and you're going to make time to sit there and watch what they're going through and then like talk about it with everyone else. So yeah, it is a very specific microcosm of our culture that I appreciate you including. And I think it's cool that they're actually real novellas that you included in the story as well. I didn't know that, because obviously I don't watch Brazilian novelas, but you know.
I hope that Brazilians that read this book, they catch that and get like, oh yeah, I liked this one too. Or what is she talking about? That was a horrible one. I hated this one. We have social relationships, right? It's a type of parasocial relationship. We have those characters as well. They grow very slowly in comparison to an American TV show that has at most 20 something episodes. We're talking about hundreds. Everyone watches those stories, those soap operas. Every class of people, every possible group of people, they end up making a huge difference in how society operates as well. I don't think that the United States has one source of entertainment that has this power to change the mentality of the people so quickly.
I think something interesting you said there was about how everyone watches it regardless of status, which I agree is something that you don't see here in the United States because of American capitalism, right? Because we have all these different channels or sites or things you have to be subscribed to if you want to access certain shows. Not everybody can even access the same forms of entertainment or even to the same degree. So like we're not all sort of consuming the same stories and the same narratives, the same media in the way that you often see with novellas. So I think that's a really valid and interesting point, and I'm glad that you brought that up as well. You mentioned that Natalia is trying to sort of get back in touch with her own culture and relearn Portuguese, which is her native language that she sort of lost a little bit of touch with. Throughout the story, she's struggling with feeling disconnected from her culture and her family back in Brazil. How do you see that emotional distance and that challenge that she's facing with assimilation as being connected to each other?
First of all, it's an individual feeling. I don't think that your family rejects you the way you feel rejected. Speaking from, my family, I am not diaspora, but my cousins are. I have this other cousin. He was born in London. His family is English, but his aunt is, my father's sister, and they come often. And I remember one time I talked to him. We were with our grandma. Our grandma obviously just speaks Portuguese. It's actually very rare to speak English here in Brazil. Only about 3% of the population do. I was trying to kind of be the interpreter, translating what he said and what she said. She said something like really sweet to him, and I couldn't find a way to translate that properly. Because again, I'm not a translator, I'm just someone who can communicate in both languages. So I was trying to think, and he got super, super angry and he left. I followed him and I met him sitting on the curb, and he said, no, it's not you I'm angry with. I'm angry with myself because I could have done more to learn Portuguese and I didn't. And now I can talk with my grandmother. There's a part in the book that is the part where Nachi calls her grandma to wish her a happy birthday. And that part was entirely for my cousin. It's not the central theme because it's not my lane. I'm not diaspora. But I wanted to touch on that a bit because whenever you want to connect with your heritage, whenever it's never too late. It's never too late to want to give it another shot. Just like there's no right way to be Brazilian, but I wanted to say, hey, it's okay if this is a decision that comes a little later in life. It's all right if you maybe at one point thought that what was best for you was distancing yourself.
I think that's really beautiful, and I completely agree. She's been conditioned away from that part of herself, but it's not too late for her to reclaim that part as well and reconnect with her. And even if she can only say certain things like happy birthday or Merry Christmas or I love you, that's still something. That's still important. That's still connections. Going back to like pop star romances in YA, were there any YA pop star romances that you read or that you looked for inspiration? Are there any that you would recommend? I know you mentioned like a lot of memoirs and biographies as well. Are there any of those that you would recommend?
For memoirs, it's funny. You're the first one to ask me about like recommendations from the memoirs and biographies I've read. There were two that were especially fun and funny, but also really heavy at times. And those were Busy Phillips. She's an actress, and Ashley Simpson. Those were the ones that made the most impact on me while I was reading. I listened to both of them on audiobook with them as the voice actors, and it was such an experience. So those were my favorite memoirs. And although these YA stories were not pop star romances, I could not have written this book without all of Maureen Gu's work and also Adiba Jaigirdar. They are probably my favorite authors of YA romance. Adibas. People always think it's funny when I talk about Adiba because we are close friends. But even if we had never met, I would still be obsessed with her writing. She is genuinely one of the best authors I have ever read, and her rom-com is funny, is full of voice, is full of deeper things interwoven in the narrative. I am obsessed with Adiba's books, and Maureen Gu is just the queen of romance, I think.
I'm so glad you brought up Maureen Gu and Adiba. I love them both. I've read everything that they've published so far. That was the one I thought of as well when I thought of pop star romances. A lot of pop star romances I think of, like I said, have to do with K-pop stars. So Maureen Gu has Somewhere Only We Know, XOXO by Axio, yes. Oh, I'll Be the One by Lila Lee.
I also read Shine, which is by an actual K-pop star.
Yes. I also noticed on your Twitter that you're a fellow Latinx weeb, which brings my heart so much joy because I think we are a rare and beautiful breed. So I love that for both of us. So I would love to ask, which two anime would you say relate to your two main characters the most? And this can be in terms of personality, vibes, storyline, whatever makes sense to you. I'm not going to police your answer for this.
I do think their relationships are that similar, but when I think about my book in general, I think it has some Toradora vibes. It's not really the relationship of the main characters, but just like there's this group that ends up being really tight, and there's also romance and some obliviousness there. So I think Toradora comes to mind. I think Nachi specifically would really enjoy something more action-packed. I think she would be probably watching Tokyo Revengers right now. She would be probably very into it. But I think William, he would like something more wholesome. I want to say My Roommate is a Cat, but that's probably because it's my favorite. I don't know that he would be as into it as I am.
This like makes absolutely no sense, but when I thought of this question for William, I just couldn't stop thinking of Oran High School Host Club, which makes no sense just because like she's poor and she's like a scholarship student. She's very humble. Then she goes into this world where it's like all this excess and all this richness, and she's like, I hate rich people, I can't be here.
I love this. This is so right.
I mean, part of it is just that I want to say Oran for everything, so I believe you've also already announced your second book. So where are you in the process of writing that? What is it about? What can we expect?
The title of my book too is Bad at Love. It's coming out summer next year. I am currently making the big round edits. There's this guy, they're both Brazilian. Sasha is Brazilian American and Daniel is a Brazilian immigrant like Nachi. And his thing is he's always wanted to play music, but he's never really felt like he deserved it. There's some big imposter syndrome there. And then he auditions to this reality show and ends up in this band that was already formed. And so he's in a punk pop band that is, you know, super popular, and everyone is obsessed with them from the reality show, but he barely even knows his bandmates who were all, you know, high school friends. Also, like me in the beginning, he's not super comfortable with his English and his accent, so he doesn't speak much, period. And all of these things, they add up to people thinking he's a big arrogant, a big snob. This one time they went to a club and he ended up falling asleep because he doesn't like going to bed late, and he falls asleep on this girl's shoulder. And because she likes the fame, she tells tabloids that they slept together and he was super drunk. And so the bad boy persona just takes a life of its own. And parallel to this, we have our girl Sasha, who has never really contemplated going to college before because she seriously doesn't have the money for this. And she takes some pics as a Los Angeles resident. She knows where the celebrities are. She sells those pictures for tabloids. But then, you know, her current sort of boss sees that she accidentally met Danielle, and he's like, you know what? I have a proposition for you. If you can get the dirtiest dirt on this bad boy, I'm giving you the magazine scholarship. And she's like, well, he only uses women. He's an asshole. He thinks so highly of himself. You know what? I'm going to bring him down. And so things evolve from there.
I didn't know that was a buzzword until today, but you said pop punk band. I'm like,
these were the bands I was listening to when I was a kid. You know, it was like Good Charlotte, Sum 41, Simple Plan as well, Yellow Card, Paramore, all of that.
So as sort of a closing, I want to remind people that if they are interested in Like a Love Song, that all of the information for you to order the book will be in the description down below. Yes, it's beautiful. I also forgot to mention that I love that you're matching the color scheme of your book with your outfit. Yes, the red carpet, the purple dress. So if you're interested, the links to order or to find out where you can get Like a Love Song will be in the description down below. And Gabriela, where can people find you on the internet? Do you have social media? What's up with that?
So on Instagram, I am Gabi, Gabhi. On Twitter, I am Gabi, written the same way, Martins. And my website is the easier one. It's just GabrielaWrites.com. Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
So thank you again so much for being here, Gabriela. I've really loved this conversation. I can't wait for people to see it and for people to also enjoy your story as well. I obviously recommend it. So once again, the links to figure out how you can get that for yourself will be down below. Be sure to check that out. Again, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for watching. I hope you've enjoyed yourself and we will see you next time. So bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.